So today you're going to learn a lot of important features of Spring Framework. Yesterday we have gone through the introduction to that Spring Framework, creating that Spring project and all, and we saw how to load the container, how to configure a bean. It was pretty simple and straightforward. Yes. So today we'll talk about how to configure the bean. We'll see how to configure this bean using XML. Okay, in the XML configuration file. So we'll try to configure the beans. Okay, yes. So first of all, I'll comment this annotations. In the last class, we have configured the beans using annotations. Okay, so I'll comment this beans. So I'm commenting all the annotations. Okay. Now let's see how to configure the beans in the XML file. So first of all, we have to comment this component scan. Now we don't need component scan anymore. Okay. Here, why did we use component scan? Why did we use component scan? In the last class, we have used component scan, right? So what is the purpose of component scan? Yes, this component scan element here, it indicates it is used to specify the details about the package in which you want the container to scan for the annotations. So in which package you want the container to scan for the beans, spring beans. In which package? You want the container to scan for the beans, spring beans. So that details, you see, we have configured it using this component scan. Yes. Okay. Now let's configure the beans in the XML. Yes, Manasa. So just now you have joined. So I'm talking about how to configure the beans using XML. That means in the XML file, how to configure the beans. You know, probably nowadays configuring the beans using XML is little less. But why I'm showing you people, because you may put up some experience and you may say that okay, I'm working for 4 years, 5 years. So previously the beans were configured using XML itself. Till 2.5 version of Spring Framework, you know, we have actually configured the beans using XML. So with the introduction of 3, so people have slowly switched to annotations. Yes. So um, now you know what, with which version of Spring Framework you're working with. Have you noticed it? In the Maven we have mentioned it. In the pom.xml file, I mean. Have you people noticed it? The Spring version is mentioned here. You see, this property Spring Framework version, it refers to that version. It's just a variable, temporary variable. This property name can be anything. It refers to 3.0.6. Now where we'll use that variable, you see here, while fetching the dependencies. You see in the dependency, you'll specify the version. It indicates that you want the framework to fetch, you want the framework to fetch the libraries related to Spring 3 framework. You see that variable, we are reading it here using this dollar, this expression. Using this expression, you're trying to read that variable value. Okay. Yes. So now let's see how to configure the beans. Let's go back. So we use bean element for that purpose. Bean, you have to specify the class details. So first of all, I'll configure that message do bean, let's say. So you have to specify the package details also. And for this bean, you can configure the ID this way. See, let's say message do. So next, let's configure the other bean, message do heap. You see, for this beans, there are no dependencies. Generally, you may have dependencies, but as of now, we don't have any dependencies for this beans. Yes. So next, we'll also configure that the example service bean. Example service bean. So let's configure the ID for this. You know what? Here for this bean, we got a dependency. You know this property here, message do, it represents a dependency, right? So let me change this property type to interface type here. If it is interface type, so it will be loosely coupled. It helps us a lot. Yes. Now this property represents a dependency, right? Yes. So how to configure this dependency in the XML file? Let's see. So that property, it represents a dependency. This message to your property represents a dependency. So let's configure that dependency details. Okay. So to configure that dependency, you'll use property element, specify the property name, message to you. So, but make sure that for this property, whenever you're going for XML version, make sure that for this property add a setter method. Please make a note of it, a big note in bold letters. Whenever you're going for XML version, make sure that you add a setter method for that property which represents a dependency. Okay. Yes. Just a second. So now you see this property will specify the details here. Now in that property represents a dependency. You want the container to inject the dependency, right? You want the container to inject the dependency. So what is the dependency here now? Yes. Which bean you want to inject here? Which bean you want to inject? You tell me. We can ask the container to inject any bean. For suppose now you have two beans which are eligible for dependencies, right? So now based on your requirement you can ask the container to inject the dependency now. For suppose here, if I want the container to inject this message to your hib, so then what I can do is I can just use this ref attribute and specify the message that ID bean ID message to your hib. That's it. iMessage to is interface, right? So that's not a bean. Yes. Now what happens? You see this statement here. Using this statement, we are asking the container to inject a bean into this property message to your whose ID is message to your heap. That's it. That's it. So this way you will configure the beans here. This way you will configure the beans. So hope this is clear for everyone. So is this bean configuration clear in the XML file? What we did? Anyone got any questions? Okay, good. Now let's test this code. Let's try to test this code. Okay. So we'll load the container. Here you see loading the container and all will not change no matter whether you're using XML or annotations. Okay. Yes. Okay. So here we are asking the container to provide that bean. So what is the method which we are using here to request the container to provide the bean reference? What is the method which you're using here? Get bean method. Okay, get bean. Yes, you see. And what is the first parameter we are passing to this get bean method? What is the first parameter we are passing to that get bean method? So that is the bean ID. The bean ID, not the reference. Bean ID. So we are configuring a bean ID for the bean, right? You see, for this example service, what is the bean ID? Example service. For this class, example service. Next, we are providing the class details. Then, once you got that the bean reference, you can use it. Okay. So let's see the container. Will it inject that message to your heap or not? Let's run this code. So message to your using highway. So is it clear for you people? So good. Now let's move on. Here I have a question for you people. Now what if I want the container to inject this message DO bean as a dependency into that example service? What if I want the container to inject the message DO bean as a dependency? Very good. So we need to change the reference from message DO hip here to that message DO. You see the bean ID is message DO, right? Just do this. That's it. Okay. So this time you see the bean whose ID is message DO, that means here this bean will be injected into this example service. Now see, it is very easy to switch the dependencies, right? So that is what I say. The beans are loosely coupled here. Yes. The beans are loosely coupled. Yes. So hope you people got it. So now let's move on. Now I'm going to talk about the types of dependencies. We'll talk about dependency types. When we talk about dependency injections, I'm sorry, dependency injection here. So it can be classified into two types. Dependency injection can be classified into two types. Number one is setter injections, injection types I can say. Setter injection, the other one is constructor injection. Okay, setter and constructor injection. Sorry. So setter injection means, let's see, actually what is this injection types? What do we mean by the setter injection, getter injection and all? Let's see. So, the container here, it is supplying the dependency to this bean, right? So that concept itself, we call it as injection, dependency injection, supplying the dependency here to the bean is called as dependency injection, you know that. Yes. So now how the container is supplying that dependency, can you people tell me? What do you people think? How the container is supplying that dependency or injecting the dependency here? So through this setter method, am I right? What it does is the container, you'll find that internally it calls that setter method, set message to you, and will pass that reference here. And that reference in turn will be assigned to this property message to you. That is how the dependency is injected here. That is how the dependency is injected. Yes. Okay. So now, for suppose what if I don't add the setter method? So will this work? What do you people think? If I comment that setter method, is it going to work? Sorry. So actually it won't work. You'll get an error. You're going to get an error. Let me show you people. You see I've commented that setter method, right? So let's see. The container will fail to find that setter method. So it will not be able to call that setter method. So it fails to inject the dependency. So this is the error which you're going to get. It says invalid property message to you of bean class example service. Bean property message is not writable. So it says it's not writable. Why it's not writable? Let's see. It's not writable or has an invalid setter method. It says has an invalid setter method. Yes. So hope you people got it. So is it clear for you people? So the container is injecting the dependency using the setter method. Next, we'll talk about the constructor injection. Let's say constructor injection. The name itself indicates. So the container will inject the dependency using the constructor. Okay, how the container uses the inject the dependency using constructor. Let's see. First of all, so if you want the container to inject the dependency using a constructor, so first of all you need to add a parameterized constructor which takes that message to your reference. Add a constructor, so which takes a message to your reference here. You see this way. You got a parameterized constructor. This constructor, you see, it is used to initialize that property message to you. Yes. Okay. So, but how do we ask the container to use that constructor? See, this time we don't have a setter method. I've commented it. So if you run this code, see there is no setter method, so it will fail. So let's see how to ask the container to inject the dependency using constructor. You see, I've commented this property now. You see, these are comments. In XML, if you want to comment any statement or any line, you do this. Okay, less than, exclamatory mark, double hyphen, and then you see double hyphen, greater than. You know, now we'll use this constructor element constructor arg element to ask the container to use constructor to inject the dependency. Okay. Yes. We'll use the constructor arg element to ask the container to inject the dependency. So to that constructor, that means it indicates that we want the container to call that constructor to supply the dependency. So which bin you want to inject now through that constructor? Let's say message to your heap, for example. So pass that message to your heap reference here. That's it. So the container, what it does this time, when it reads this constructor arg element, it will understand that okay, it has to call that constructor. Okay, it has to call that constructor. Yes. It will check for the parameterized constructor here. It will check for the parameterized constructor, I can say. So if it if it finds it, then it will simply call that constructor and supply that reference. So that constructor will take that reference. The constructor will take the reference and it will assign that reference to that property. That is how the injection works. That is constructor injection. So just a second. I'll show you people the test case later on. You can also add a default constructor. It's always a good practice to add a default constructor. Okay, so let's run this code. You see, it works. So hope you people got it. Yes. So this is the XML file. Fine. But if we define constructor in message to you, but actually we are talking about the example service bean, and we are talking about the constructor which you got in the example service bean. Okay, so we it doesn't matter whether you have a what constructor in the message to you, but the only thing is you're obtaining that message to your heap reference and it will be supplied here into this example service bean constructor. That's it. You got it? So hope everyone got it. Sorry. So now what do people think, which approach is better? Which approach is better? Setter injection is better or constructor injection? So setter injection is better. Okay, good. So why do you think setter injection is better? Yeah, you see, for each property we can set that dependency, right? Okay. So the other advantages that here you'll find that, sorry, the problem with, not advantage, the problem with your constructor injection is, for suppose, let's say if I have 10 dependencies, you know, for a bean, it's not a uh, unusual thing. You may have several dependencies, 10 dependencies, 15 dependencies, depends. So for suppose if you have 10 dependencies, that means you need to you need to define a constructor with how many parameters? 10. That's right. You have to add a construct with 10 parameters and you have to configure it accordingly. Let's say defining a construct with so many parameters would be little uneasy, right? So it's better if you can go over setter injection. That's it. You know what? Again, please write a important note here in bold letters. So what is it? This dependency injection types, you'll find that we only uh, they're only valid for XML configurations. Okay, XML version. They're only valid for XML version here. Okay, not for annotations. In annotations, we don't talk about this dependency injection types. They are not valid. Now let's talk about auto wiring concept here. Auto wiring. So generally before that, you know what, let me also use tell you people this term bean wiring. You know bean wiring. Bean wiring means, you know, I can say that configuring a bean, associating the beans, I can say associating the beans or configuring the bean, one bean as a dependency to another bean. Okay, associating the beans, or in other words, I can say, you know, configuring one bean as a dependency to another bean here. Okay, configuring one bean as a dependency to another bean. And here we did that. Can you people tell me in which lines we have done this bean wiring in this XML file? In which lines we have done this bean wiring now? In line 17. That's right, exactly. So we are asking the container to supply this message to your heap as a dependency to this example service bean. So that means we are wiring the message to your heap with message, sorry, with example service. Message to your heap with example service. That is what we are doing. Okay. Now that configuration details, you see the dependencies details, we are configuring them or we are wiring them explicitly. But if you want, you know, we can prefer to go with auto wiring. We can prefer to go with auto wiring. Auto wiring means, let's see, auto wiring means, instead of we configuring the dependency details explicitly or wiring details explicitly, we'll leave it to the container itself. The container itself will, you know, fetch that dependencies. We don't need to configure them manually. Container itself will fetch the dependencies and it will supply it or inject that into the bean here. That's it. Okay. But by default it won't do that. So now we have to explicitly ask the container to do that. So I'll delete these two lines. You see. Now see, we didn't configure the dependency details, right? So now what we'll do is here, we'll enable this auto wiring for this particular bean. Auto wire equal to by name, let's say. Auto wiring, you'll find that there are different types by name. So auto wiring by name means we are asking the container to search for the dependencies by name. Which name? Let's see. It will search for the dependency with which name, let's see. When we do this, now the container, what it does is here. Okay, I'll do one thing before that. I'm sorry. Let me add a setter method. Okay, always the container does the injection through the setter method for auto wiring. Now you see, when we configure that auto wiring by setter method, okay, yes, you'll find that sorry, auto wiring by name. What happens is now the container will check for this will read this property. The container will read this property here. Yes. So whenever the container reads this property, so it understands that here, you know, that property, it represents a dependency here. That property represents a dependency. So because that property represents a dependency, now the container will read the property name. It will take the property name. Okay. And you know what it does here? It will check whether there is any bean. It will check whether there is any bean whose ID matches this property name. It will check whether there is any bean whose ID matches this property name here. Okay. To check whether there is any bean whose ID matches that property name. Yes. So is there any bean whose ID matches the property name? Is there any bean whose ID matches this property name? What do people think? Do you see any bean which is configured here whose ID matches the property name? Yes, there is a bean whose ID matches that property name, right? So the container will simply fetch this bean, will obtain this bean message to you, and it will inject into this example service. It will inject into that example service. Okay, let's see. I'll run this code. So this time it injects that message to you. You see, using JDBC. Yes. Okay. Now this is dependency injection, auto wiring by name. That means the container itself is searching for the dependency based on the property name, and it injects it into this bean. So is it clear for everyone? Any questions in this regard? Okay, very good. Now we'll see the other type, auto wiring by name, sorry, by type. Auto wiring by type. That means this time the container will check this property, but it will go with property type instead of property name. It will go with property type instead of property name. So what is the property type here? What is the property type? The property type is iMessageDO, right? That property itself represents the dependency, and that property type is iMessageDO. The property type is iMessageDO here. Yes. So now can you people tell me, you got how many beans of that particular type? Is there any bean? Yes. How many beans of that property type? Two beans. You see? Sorry. Yeah. You have two beans. You see? These two bean classes, they both are eligible as dependencies. I can say these two beans are eligible as dependencies. So this time the container is going to inject which bean as a dependency. This time the container will inject which bean as a dependency here. What do you people think? Now both the beans, I can say they are iMessage to your type because both the beans implement that interface, right? Yes. So two beans are eligible as dependencies here. Both the beans are eligible as dependencies. Yes. You know the container, in this case, it's an ambiguity for the container. Okay. It's ambiguity situation for the container. Container is not going to inject any dependence in this case. Okay. It will simply throw an error. So read this line, all of you. What it says, the highlighted line. No unique bean of type iMessageDO is defined. Expected single matching bean, but it says it found two. It was expecting only one bean here of that particular type, but it found two. Okay, that's the problem. So it's a confusion for the container. So simply container will not take any risk. It throws an exception this way. So is it clear for you people? So what to do in this case? So in this case, I can say that here you better don't use auto wiring by type if you have multiple beans of same type. Okay, either fall back to by name or explicitly configure the dependency details. Yes. So these are the two options which you got here. Okay. Next, we got auto wiring by constructor also. Yes. Okay. Auto wiring by constructor. So what does that means? Here, now if you want the container to inject the dependency by constructor, that means auto wiring by constructor. Auto wiring by constructor, I can say that it's almost similar to your auto wiring by type. You need to add a parameterized constructor which represents the dependency. So you see that for that constructor, the parameter should be the dependency type. Okay. You know, now this time the container will go with this parameter type to understand the dependency here. Okay. The container will go with parameter type to understand the dependency. Yes. Okay. So the parameter type is interface type. Now you know that there are two bins of that type. So what happens? So this time I can say that the container fails to inject the dependency again because you have more than one type of same type, right? But it won't throw any exception. But you will get an exception when that reference is used. So this reference will be null. You call that method on the null reference, you'll get null pointer exception. Oh, it's working. I'm sorry. Just a minute. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll tell you. Forgot to tell you one thing. In Spring 3, the constructor injection has slightly modified the functionality. You know what it does? First, it will go with type. If it fails to find the dependency by type, then it will go with parameter name. It will go with parameter name. Okay. So any questions? Fine. This is about the auto wiring. Now we'll go back to annotations. Okay. I'll comment all this thing, bean configurations. I'll enable this component scan. Let me add this annotations. You know, here in annotations, we are using this @autowide, right? So that annotation @autowide, it indicates that we want the container to search for the dependency and inject it accordingly. Okay, that is what it indicates. Now, the container will follow two different approaches to search for the dependency. One approach is it will go with by type. by name. One approach is it will go with name, and the other one by type. So these are the two different approaches it will follow. Okay, by type and by name. Okay. Now if it first you say it will follow that name. Now let's say we have these two beans, right? I'll configure the bean IDs this way. You see, the bean ID of this bean message to your bean is message to your JDBC, let's say, and the other bean ID is message to your heap, let's say, message to your heap. Now, is there any bean whose ID matches that property name? Is there any bean whose ID matches that property name? Now there is no bean I can say. You see, the property name is message to your. Now one of the bean is message to your JDBC, the other one is message to your heap. So it doesn't match that bean IDs, right? The bean name, the property name doesn't match any of the bean IDs. Yeah. Okay. Hope you people got it. So this time, so it fails to find the dependency by name, right? So it will go for type then. Okay. It will go for type. It will search for the dependency based on the type. So is there any bean whose type matches this property type? Yes, of course. There is a bean whose type matches that property type, right? Yeah. But you got two beans here. So what happens in this case? What do you people think? What happens? You'll find that the container will throw an exception because you got more than one bean of same type. The same exception here, you see. No unique bean of type iMessage is defined. That is what it says. It says it found two. So is it clear for you people? So it is same auto wiring which we saw earlier. Here it follows two different approaches, by name or by type, till it finds a dependency. Otherwise it throws exception this way. Okay. Now using annotations, can we ask the container to explicitly inject a dependency? It means, for suppose, I want the container to particularly inject that message to your heap as a dependency. So what to do? Uh, Not setup. You can use this qualifier annotation. Qualifier, qualifier. You know, so you can configure the ID of the bean which you want to be injected here. That's it. So which bean you want to inject, that bean ID, you'll configure it here. So this time the container will inject the bean whose ID is message to your heap. So message to your using hibernate. That's it. Okay. So the last thing here today, what I'm going to tell you people is regarding the bean scope. Bean scope. So what is this bean scope? Let's see. So when you talk about the bean scope, you can say that it is all about how the container will maintain that bean objects, like how many instances it creates and all. How many instances it is going to create. By default, the container follows singleton pattern. By default, the container follows singleton pattern here. Okay. Singleton bean scope, I can say. So what does that means? That means, the container will only instantiate or will create only one bean instance throughout the application. Okay, you'll find that it only maintains one bean instance. That means it just creates one bean instance, not more than one bean. Okay, that is singleton bean scope. For example, you see, even though if you try to place the request for a particular bean more than once, they will try to place the request for that example service bean twice. How many bean objects it is going to create? It will only instantiate that example service bean once. It only creates one bean object and it maintains that bean object reference. That's it. Example service 1 equal to example service 2. We'll compare it. You'll come to know. You see, I'll use this relational operator to check whether these two reference variables are referring to the same bean or different beans here. That means bean objects, bean instances. Okay. So in this case, you see, it creates only one bean object. That means both the time it returns the same bean object reference. It returns the same bean object reference here. It returns true. Yes, it returns true. What if you want the container to create a different bean instance every time? Each time, say you want the container to create a different bean instance. Yes, very good. That's right. So you're going to use this pin scope prototype. Let's see how to specify the details here. By default, the pin scope is singleton. You can configure prototype here. Okay, this way. Please make a note of it. So every time it creates a new bean instance now. Now, this time, you see we are placing the request twice, right? So each time the container creates a new bean instance this time. Each time the container is going to create a new bean instance. Let's see. See, you'll get false. That means these two reference variables are referring to two different objects. Yep. So now why the container by default follows that singleton pattern here? What do people think? You see, because to make sure that uh, it optimizes that memory usage. Yes, it optimizes that memory usage, I can say. It won't create unnecessarily objects, right? Yeah. So based on your need, you can specify the bean scope, how many bean instances you want, whether you want a separate bean instance every time, or you want a single bean instance. Yes. Okay. So this is about the bean scope here. Fine. So we got entity object sorry, we got spring bean life cycle, but I'm going to talk about it in the next module itself. So tomorrow I'm going to start with spring JDBC module. So we'll be done with that module. Tomorrow is a long session. So after that spring JDBC module, I'm going to also start with spring MVC tomorrow. Okay, so we'll start with spring MVC also. Yeah. So I'll stop it here today. Let's meet tomorrow and continue our discussion. Okay, yeah, that's all for today. So thank you all. Bye bye.